My name is Paul Eaton. This is Scholarly Short number 1, in which I will discuss Elizabeth Adams St. Pierre's recent piece in the Journal of Curriculum Theorizing, A Brief and Personal History of Post-Qualitative Inquiry Toward Post-Inquiry, which was published in 2014. In this piece, Elizabeth Adams St. Pierre traces her own unfolding and journey toward becoming what she calls a post-qualitative researcher. This began for her during her graduate studies at Ohio State University, in which she was exposed to philosophers and thinkers such as Derrida, Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari, whose way of thinking about the world and thinking about how we should be doing research are not necessarily capable of fitting into what we traditionally think of as qualitative inquiry. So she goes on to describe how her dissertation wrestled with this idea of thinking about doing qualitative inquiry from a different perspective, and she developed a methodology for her dissertation research that she called Methodology in the Fold, which draws from Deleuze and Guattari's book, A Thousand Plateaus. Later in the article, she talks about how, as a scholar and a teacher and someone attempting to work with students that are doing qualitative inquiry, she continued to struggle with her defense of qualitative inquiry. And this largely arose due to the first decade of this millennium being a time when educational researchers really reestablished positivism as the only way of thinking about doing research. Measures of accountability and other forces in society that really sought certainty in educational outcomes really forced qualitative inquiry to go through a process by which method and rigidity really became paramount. And so post-qualitative inquiry has largely arisen, although this is not a linear trajectory and it's not necessarily in response to, but it's a way of critiquing the assumptions that undergird traditional qualitative methods as we think about them today. And so one of the things that post-qualitative researchers are attempting to upend is the idea of the centering of the human as well as the knowing human subject. And so St. Pierre in this article talks a lot about how upending, decentering the human, decentering epistemology as the center of inquiry really leads to some different types of challenges and different ways of thinking about doing research. And this is what I like about the article, because she talks about the importance of theory and how, as researchers, we need to be more engaged in thinking with theory, which is a concept that is also talked about by Alicia Youngblood Jackson and Lisa Mazzei, who wrote a book in 2012 called Thinking with Theory in Qualitative Research. So St. Pierre in this piece talks about how we aren't doing enough to utilize theoretical concepts that have already been developed by theorists in the ways that they were intended to be used. So, for example, we're not using Foucault's genealogy in an appropriate way. We might not be using concepts from Deleuze and Guattari, such as the assemblage or the fold, in ways that are necessarily really advancing our knowledge and understanding in qualitative inquiry. So I think one of the takeaways from this piece for me is that we need to spend more time as researchers actually reading theory, thinking about theory in really critical ways, and then using concepts from theorists that have already been developed to think and question education in new ways. And this is some of the work that I'm attempting to do in my own personal research agenda, particularly around digital social medias, post-humanist inquiries, things of this nature. So I think that's one takeaway from this article, is that we need to spend more time as researchers thinking about theory and wrestling with the ideas that are already out there, rather than just replicating studies, adhering to strict methodologies, coding data, things of this nature, which is how qualitative inquiry has traditionally been thought about, or has evolved to be thought about in this current contemporary time that we live in. I think the second thing that Elizabeth Adams St. Pierre really challenges us to think about in this piece is whether, when we decenter the human and we decenter epistemology as the purposes of inquiry, whether concepts that we have, such as the concept of someone being a researcher, or concepts such as actually doing inquiry, can even exist at all. And this is a question that she raises towards the end of the article, and I believe that she says it's an impossible question to answer, right? That rather it's something we need to think about, it's something we need to talk about with other researchers, but that there may not necessarily be an answer because, of course, we are humans, and we have and will continue to privilege the fact that we are humans. So thinking about decentering the human or decentering epistemology becomes a very challenging project, but one that is enticing to people who want to think about inquiry in different ways, think about education in different ways. And so she challenges all of us who read the article at the end to actually think about, what does being a post-qualitative researcher actually mean? How do we think about inquiry differently when we're talking about it from a post-qualitative or a post-humanist perspective? So this is an important article. It traces her own experiences as a researcher, wrestling with some of these large questions that have developed around what we think of as qualitative inquiry, and now what we're talking about in terms of post-qualitative inquiry. So anyone interested in those types of questions, philosophical questions, methodological questions, would benefit from reading this article. Hopefully this gave you a good overview. I also invite you to my blog, where I have written about this article, and that will hopefully provide some further insights for folks that are interested in what this article contributes to our understanding about post-qualitative inquiry in education.